and then I'll start sharing. I'll start sharing now. And I'm going to hide presenter view, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining the session. Today we are going to cover a case study of PeopleSoft grants and PeopleSoft financials on Oracle Cloud. There's three presenters. We'll do some quick introductions before we go into the slides. So my name is Tom Treader. I'm a managing director with PeopleSoft Consulting. I've been doing consulting and have worked in the industry as well, supporting PeopleSoft for over 20 years. We also have Madhuri Panam. Madhuri's a senior PeopleSoft grants consultant with PeopleSoft, and then also Gretchen Mulvihill. She's a grants manager at Luminous Health. Okay, the first slide is just a quick plug for some of PeopleSoft's other Quest and Vision conference sessions. We actually have 13 sessions this year. It's a record for Spear. So, you know, everyone's more than welcome to join those sessions. We'd love to see you on those. Then we're going to go into a couple slides about Luminous Health System. So Luminous Health actually just came to be. It's the result of a merger between Anne Arundel Medical Center and Doctors Community Health System. That merger just completed within the last year officially, and the branding is already completed as well. There's about 6,500 employees total throughout the system, 1,700 physicians, 595 beds. Operational revenue is $773 million, and the annual grant funding is about $6.3 million. So that's kind of the operations view. From a PeopleSoft systems perspective, this slide just lists the modules. So it's largely core PeopleSoft financials and grants along with supply chain. There is no PeopleSoft HCM that's being run there. It's continued to be a third-party HCM system, which I believe they're looking to replace here in the next few years. PeopleSoft went live originally on 9/2 in 2016. They're currently on PeopleSoft 9/2 Image 33 and Tools 857. And in 2019, it was Anne Arundel Medical Center back then, but AAMC was awarded an Oracle Innovator Award for some of the work that was done with OCI and the grants as well. I have a few more slides about PeopleSoft. So PeopleSoft is many of you may have seen this before, but we do all things PeopleSoft. So implementation work across financials, HCM, campus solutions. We do application support and managed services. We really focus on training. We have a full library of training content, and we're an Oracle University reseller. For anyone that is interested in learning subscriptions from Oracle University, we do offer those at a discount. And then, of course, we offer our live and virtual and on-demand training through our website, for all applications and all tools and technologies, including OCI. We do quite a bit of work around PeopleSoft test framework and test automation. We offer managed services around PUM updates, and we do Oracle EPM Cloud and business intelligence as well. So this slide kind of gives a history of Sphere. We're very proud to have been founded in San Francisco and have slowly opened up offices across all regions around the U.S., with our most recent being in Pittsburgh in 2019. We're very proud to have been recently recognized by Gartner around our Oracle Cloud infrastructure offering. So this slide just kind of speaks to that recognition that we recently received. I mentioned earlier we offer managed services. So our managed services really have threads across all the work that we do. So technical support, functional support, running and managing PeopleSoft either on OCI or on-prem, staying current, so applying PUMs and People Tools updates. If you have training, specialized training that you need to keep up to date, we do that as well. And we wrap our testing services around all of it. For automating your testing, for staying current. So that's it for the SphereMC plug. In terms of our session agenda, it's really focused on Luminous Health's grants, strategy, and journey. Really to grow the business and grow grant funding for the medical center, which also has a number of other benefits with it. So the agenda points really kind of follow the journey. So starting with the original business plan that was written around the research organization and foundation, which actually led to the PeopleSoft system selection and the grants implementation. So we'll talk a little bit about the business plan, some of the upfront discovery workshops that were run before the implementation started. We'll give a quick overview of grants at AAMC as the project was just getting started. We'll cover the various grant types that they're using, implementation challenges, what the solution actually consisted of. So, when we talk about the design and those different grant types, how did it get implemented? And then last but not least, we're going to cover the benefits realized and lessons learned. And then we also have a slide at the end around impacts from COVID on the foundation and research organizations. Okay, so this first slide talks about the business plan. So the business plan that was laid out was really around these 3 points. The AAMC wanted to optimize funding that was raised across existing sponsors and contracts. They wanted to optimize on the types and the variety of funding sources, so not just with their existing sponsors, but new sponsors. So they really wanted to go after federal grants, which at the time some of the controls and the processes and systems weren't in place for that. So that was really one of the big goals. And then last but not least, developing a lean structure for securing and executing grants. So clearly define the organization structure, refine the business processes for managing grants, reporting on grants, really the whole life cycle of it. Improving accounting controls for grant revenue and expenditures. Of course, implementing the technology that would enable it all. So the technology being PeopleSoft, and then eliminating all the manual processes and paper that was currently in place before the implementation. So after, one of the first steps when PeopleSoft was involved, and that was through our partnership with Oracle. We went through a series of product demos. It was really a package selection that we were a part of. AAMC was naturally looking at PeopleSoft since they were on PeopleSoft Financials, but they were looking at other alternatives and options as well. Of course, keeping things manual was always an option. We put together, once the selection was made, we held some insight calls with other research organizations that were on PeopleSoft. This was part of the selection process. So it enabled Anna Rundle to also, at the time, ask questions of organizations that had, much bigger research institutes and, portfolios of grants, and kind of get their perspective on, how they've matured and how they were using PeopleSoft and or any other systems to manage and execute their grants. Once the selection was made for PeopleSoft, we held another workshop, and we also involved organizations outside of Oracle and PeopleSoft. These were other Oracle customers. So if you can see the logos in the slide, we held calls with Kaiser Permanente, Public Health Institute, and Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center in Seattle. So all three of those organizations were on PeopleSoft and had been on grants as well. So they were fairly mature users of the product. This next slide really talks about some of the key requirements at a high level that were identified. A lot of these are, similar themes to what we already talked about from the business plan. But first point, goal was to have a centralized and standardized grants management process. They wanted the grant solution to be integrated with finance and accounting. They wanted to be able to manage all of their unique grants and award types in the system with the same set of processes. They wanted to be able to track expenditures and produce billable transactions based on the terms of the awards that were granted. Wanted to automatically generate accounting entries, feed those entries to GL, and generate federal reports based on the actual grant activity within the system. They were using QuickBooks at the time for billing and receivables. So a big goal was to eliminate QuickBooks and replace that with standard PeopleSoft AR billing functionality. Another pain point was effort reporting and tracking labor costs. So they wanted to standardize, that effort reporting and labor cost distribution across their projects. They wanted to be able to track cost sharing for budgets and transactions across their different projects and organizations. They wanted to systematically calculate overhead expenses and have the ability to manage multiple year grants. In terms of the PeopleSoft module scope, this just highlights the modules that were in scope. You'll notice for the initial go live, the net new modules were grants, contracts, project costing, and it did not include AR billing for the first deployment, the first phase. This slide really just talks to the kind of end-to-end grant process and life cycle. So won't spend too much time on this, but really starting with sponsor requirements at the top left corner, flowing in to basically the proposal management process, which is really handled in the grants module. So identifying opportunities, qualifying opportunities, building proposals, and ultimately generating awards once the grant is won. That feeds into creating contracts and projects, and from there, it's a matter of executing the project, tracking time, expenses, procurement, materials, any of the costs that are incurred, and then last, closing out the project and performing project analytics and performance metrics at the end. Skip ahead. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Madhuri, who's going to go into some more details about the specific solution and the grant types, various grant types that were in scope for the implementation.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks everyone for joining. So at Luminous, the grants are mainly, sorry, can you guys hear me? I hear some background sound. Tom, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So at Luminous, the grants are managed by primarily two departments, foundation and research. So coming to foundation grants, most of their grants are prepaid. So they receive money upfront for these grants. So we utilize the delivered prepaid functionality in PeopleSoft to implement these. So the grant, once the grant funding is received, we will create establish the corresponding deferred revenue. And when the expenses occur against that grant, the revenue is recognized and corresponding deferred revenue is relieved. So that's the prepaid functionality, which most of the foundation grants used. And the other type of grants that the foundation have are grants, the straight reimbursable grants. So here the expenses, once the expenses incurred, we used manager transaction review to approve those expenses. So the corresponding project managers approve the expenses using the manager transaction review functionality in project costing. And once the project managers approve the expenses, the project accounting process is run, and that's when the revenue is recognized for those expenses. And once the expenses are approved, the corresponding billable expenses are sent into billing to generate invoices and are also sent into AR to create a corresponding open AR item. So that's the second type of grants that foundation had. And most of the expenses for the foundation grants are coming from labor costs. So as Tom mentioned earlier, Luminous are not using PeopleSoft HCM, so they were using a third-party system to capture their labor costs. So we had to develop an interface from the third-party system into project costing to bring in those costs for these particular employees into project costing. And the other type of the other department that manages grants is research. So most of these research grants are clinical trials. So again, these research grants were maintaining their milestones in a different system, third-party system called Velos. So we had to develop another interface here to bring in those milestones into project costing and recognize revenue for them. So we had two interfaces, one for labor cost and then the other for research grants to bring in the milestones. So Tom, we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this gives an end-to-end integration solution overview. So here, if you see, we have transactions coming from different submodules like purchasing, accounts payable, general ledger, and API, which is the third-party labor capturing system, and the Velos to get the milestones related to the research grants. So once these transactions from different modules and different systems are cost collected into project costing, it will create corresponding target rows. So it will create billable rows and other target rows wherever needed based on the pricing set up on the contract. And once the target rows are created, the corresponding project managers will approve these transactions using the manager transaction review. So if they don't approve it, the transaction remain in project costing table. And if they do approve them, then when the project costing accounting process is run, it will create the corresponding accounting entries. So once the accounting entries are created in project costing and journal generating those accounting entries will send these entries into GL. And the approved billable transactions are also sent into billing. So this to generate the invoices. So this will generate invoices and also will create billing accounting entries. So again, when it's journal generated, these accounting entries are sent into GL. And after the invoices are generated, sorry, Tom, let's go back. We have one more. Let's go back to the previous slide. Yeah. So after the invoices are generated, the information is sent into accounts receivable, and it creates an open AR item. And once we receive the payment from the sponsor, the payment is applied and accounting entries are created in AR and also sent into GL. So these are the different integration points into GL from the submodules like project costing, billing, and AR. We can go to the next slide now. Okay, so now let's discuss about some of the solution decisions. So these are mostly related to foundation. So as we were discussing, they were using a different third-party system to capture their labor. So initially, they didn't have a capability to capture those costs at the project level. So they have to make some changes on their end in order for the employees to be able to charge the time against the project. So that's one of the update they made on their side. And once the employees were able to charge time against the project, API runs report at the end of every month and sends this information transactions into project costing, and the interface program developed on the PeopleSoft side will bring in these transactions into project costing and will create the corresponding billable rows for these expenses. And again, these billable rows are reviewed and approved by the corresponding project managers and will be sent into billing and AR. So, and one more thing we want to stress here is we did a two-phase implementation for grants. The first phase, we did just grants, project costing, and contracts. And in the second phase, we did AR and billing. So the phase 2 transition was from manual invoices to PeopleSoft generated invoices. And we, as an interim solution to record these prepayments, we used manual journals to credit the deferred revenue and debit the cash. And also we have to create the accounting rules in such a way that they will debit the deferred revenue and credit revenue. This allowed us to maintain the deferred revenue and revenue balances correctly. So that was the interim solution before we went live with phase 2. We can go to the next slide, Tom. So this is an example of how the time is captured in API. So if you see, there's a code, so 34325. So that's the project. So initially they didn't have that, so they had to include this new field in there so that the employees will be able to capture the time against the project. And you can go to the next slide, Tom. And once that transaction comes into project costing, it looks like this. So you can see the project activity. So the activity is populated based on the project ID. So the interface program looks for the project ID and also looks for the corresponding active activity, and then it will populate the activity based on the project. And all of these other chart fields are coming from the API. So the GL business unit, the department, corresponding account, and everything is coming in from the API in the file they'll be sending to the project costing. We can go to the next slide, Tom. And one important key setup related to projects is project organization that we did at Luminous. We have to establish this organization in order for us to drive the accounting entries, in order for us to create the accounting entries in a particular way. So there was a requirement in Luminous where they want to create the accounting entries to a particular GL business unit and department. So they want their accounting entries to their home GL business unit and department. So we used organization functionality where they'll be establishing the organization for each of their projects. So they'll input their home GL business unit and home department, and the accounting rules are created in such a way that the accounting entries are created as per the requirement. So this is one of the key setup we did at Luminous. We can go to the next slide. That was about the foundation solution that we discussed previously. And now coming to research. So as mentioned before, research was using a different system to maintain their milestones. So they had three types of milestones. So there are payables, which are expenses, and they have receivables, which calculates the revenue, and they have invoiceables, which creates the billable, which are the billable rows. So in order to accommodate this, we had to create a contract plan so that it will be able to allow all these three types of transactions and create corresponding target rows. So if you see in this slide, we have shown how the rate plan is created. So there are three different rate sets under this. So the first rate set is VLE, which will look at the rows with source analysis type of VLE, which are payables on the well-loss side, and VLIs are the invoiceables on the well-loss side, and VLR are the receivables on the well-loss side. So each of these rate sets will create corresponding target rows, which we'll be seeing in the next slide. Yes. So if you see here on the table, it shows, so the VLE will be your original analysis type, and your target analysis type will be ALC. So based on the rate set, it will create the target analysis types. And also this shows how the accounting rules are set up. So if you see for VLE, once the target analysis type is created, and when we run the accounting process, it will debit the corresponding expense account and credit the corresponding revenue account. And also if you see the GL, BU and department, it segregates between organization and transaction. So organizational values are those that we set up on the project that we saw previously. So it takes the GL, BU and department from that organization. And in case of transactional values, it takes those values from the original transaction. So the GL, BU and the department will be coming in from the original transaction in such cases. So for VLE, we'll have the ALC as a target. And if you see here, we do have two VLEs. This is because they, depending on their type of payable, they want to use different expense account. So we used a different chart field called source type to segregate this. So the rate sets look for the analysis type and source type combination and creates the accounting entries based on those. Okay, so that is VLE. And coming to VLRs, so these are receivables that will calculate the revenue, and it will create a target analysis type of FRD, and it will it will debit the receivables account and it will credit the revenue account. And similarly, we have VLI, which are invoiceables. So these will be creating the billable rows that will be sent into billing to create invoices. And this will debit the unbilled AR account and will credit the revenue account. So we had to create these multiple accounting rules in order to meet their accounting entries requirement. We can go to the next slide, Tom. So this is an example of project costing transaction table, that how it looks once we load the file from the Velos. So if you see, the transactions in red are the original rows, so that are coming in from Velos, and the purple transactions are the ones that are created from the pricing. So based on the rate plan associated with the contract, so you see the purple lines created, target rows created. So for VLEs, we'll have ALCs created and different source types, and for different source types. And then for VLRs, we'll have FRD to calculate the revenue, and for VLIs, we'll have the billable rows to send to billing to generate the invoices. So this is pretty much that the research solution that we created, where we use the milestones. Basically, they're the fixed milestones on their end, but we treated them as incurred and created accounting entries using the accounting rules. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Tom. Yeah, coming to the implementation challenges, so planned budget did not include funding for AR and billing. So when initially the budget was developed, SPRMC was not involved, and so we have to design a two-phase implementation where we did grants, contracts, project costing in the first phase, and billing and AR in the second phase. And distinct requirements, yes. So the foundation and research had different types of grants, so that solutions are very different. So that was a small challenge that we had to accommodate all of the requirements from both the departments. And project costing was partially configured for capital projects, so there is already existing configuration in there. So we have to take that into consideration, make sure the current process is not affected with the new configuration and processing that we are doing. And API HCM could not capture time and labor for project costing. So as I mentioned earlier, the API system was not capable of recording the transactions at the project level. So they had to make some updates on their end so that the employees will be able to capture the cost at the project level. And yeah, so the Velos system required a creative solution. So the one which we were talking earlier. So the ones which are the fixed milestones have to be treated as incurred grants. So that is one of the creative solutions that we came up with in order to meet their accounting entries requirement. And of course, data cleansing and conversion. Yes. So with for foundation, it was pretty okay, but for research, they had like a lot of projects that they were maintaining in Velos, and in order for them to review all of their milestones and reconcile to get the correct amounts to put into PeopleSoft, that was a bit of a challenge. So these are some of the implementation challenges that we went through. And that being said, I would like to hand it over to Gretchen to go over lessons learned and benefits realized. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So lessons learned throughout our implementation. It was a fun project, but a lot of work. And so trying to figure out exactly who the stakeholders are and that need to chime in on the development of this platform, and really refine the utilization of it, how we envision using it to just amplify and enhance our current business practices. Just need a little bit more uncovering, if you will, and a little bit more forethought. Also, that kind of goes back into our current state processes about, we don't want to keep doing what we're currently doing. This was an opportunity for us to uncover ways to do what we're doing, work smarter, not harder. And so I did feel like a lot of it was us just trying to start thinking outside of the box, and that's what Madhuri and Tom were so invaluable for us, because they came with all of this knowledge and expertise of how this has been utilized at other growing health systems, and so it was wonderful to have them as part of the team. Also, the data quality, we keep really great data, but the process of cleaning it and making sure that it was in the best format to translate into PeopleSoft, if you will, was challenging. Again, it was just us working within archaic or different platforms that just made the translation of our information and data just a little bit more difficult and tenuous. But we got through it. And so now I'll move on to the next slide, which I think talks about benefits. So a funny thing about when I remember sitting down with my boss. She's the CDO and the president of the foundation, Jan Wood, and I talked to her about how we need to have a streamlined grant process. We need to have a streamlined platform of where we can manage labor costs, where we can manage all of our processes pre and post award. And I remember her telling me, well, the heat is on because this isn't cheap. This comes at a cost. And so what is the ROI? How am I going to deliver an ROI for my, not only for, you know, my career growth, but how am I going to deliver for the organization that's making such a tremendous investment in my work? And so I'm pleased to say that PeopleSoft and all of the work that we did, can't believe it's been 2 years since we began this journey, but we've been able to raise, as Tom mentioned on a previous slide, $6.3 million. We're actually now up to $6.5 million. And to give you guys some perspective, the grants program at Anne Arundel Medical Center is as old as I've been there, which is just 6.5 years. There was no grant program at Anne Arundel Medical Center. When I came on, we traditionally were around 2 million, 3 million. We kind of ticked up to 4 million one year. So to just have this tremendous year to raise $6.5 million is incredible, especially in, you know, we live in Maryland. We're competing with some of the best hospitals, some of the best research hospitals in the country for Maryland state funds for patient care and quality work. And so I like to think that PeopleSoft really enabled us to do that because it freed me up to do what I do best, which is writing grants. I didn't have to be bogged down with all of the processes as far as budgeting and auditing. It was automated rather than manual. And so that really made all the difference in us being able to deliver an increase in grant funding and revenue and expanding our breadth and depth and receiving more federal funds than we have before. You can go to the next slide. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the impacts of COVID on grant funding. Something that, and I'm not sure if any of you work for health systems or work in fundraising or in grants management, but one really wonderful thing that has come out of COVID, if we can say that, a silver lining, is that now grants are seen as a big player. As far as offsetting deficits as a result of the COVID impacts. Our hospital was not immune, like every other hospital and health system in this country and across the world, to the impacts of COVID. So being able to have a wonderful financial system to manage these grants, these COVID grants that we did receive, was a huge sigh of relief for me because many of them were federal funds and they're going to be reviewed and they're going to be looked at with a magnification of 10,000 compared to what typically funding is looked at. They want to make sure to the dollar, is it going towards PPE? Is it going towards actual patient care? Is it going to telehealth? It is going to be scrutinized. So it has really elevated our profile and that now we are able to really deliver significant impact to the health of our patients. Something else that changed is that grant funders have really become more open to the possibility of funding general operations. This is not typically something that occurs. It's kind of like the Holy Grail when you find a grantor that's like, of course, I'll just offset, you know, just add this to the bottom line. I'm happy to support your overall operations. That never happens. Typically programmatic funding, very restricted funding, which is why PeopleSoft is so wonderful because we can restrict and we can get down to the line detail of where every single cent goes. But those operational dollars are just so very important during a pandemic, just trying to offset our deficits. Also, this is always interesting to me. It's, you know, we're a health system. You know, we want people, we're paid based on the quality and the patients that come to our hospital. But now, because of the pandemic, we don't want people coming here anymore. A very different shift. We want to really be able to come to our patient, if possible, and provide them high quality, low cost care, but in a setting where they are not at risk for contracting COVID or another infectious disease. And so really telehealth has come to the forefront, and utilizing remote patient monitoring is another example. Patients that are not acutely ill and that can be monitored by qualified care providers at the hospital is tremendous. It really has changed the landscape of healthcare, and I expect that will continue. Community and population health is also, I think it's always been there. COVID, unfortunately, shined a light on the inequities that we see in our communities that were, hidden, to be honest. We now see, the vulnerable patients, our elderly patients, our mental health and behavioral health patients that are suffering at home for fear of going to the hospital because of COVID. And so, we really have focused a lot on what does the care beyond the walls look like? How are we taking our teams and our expertise on the road to meet these patients where they are? How are we speaking to them appropriately? Do we have bilingual care providers? Are we culturally sensitive to what's going on with their families and their livelihood and their finances and their families, their children? Everything comes into play. And so we really are taking a closer look at social determinants and how that affects health. And I do think that that's just bubbled up and really become very apparent because of the pandemic. You can go to the next slide. Oh, I think it's questions.
That's it. All right, well, thank you, Gretchen. Yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and open it up to any questions that people have. You can go ahead and enter those in the comments. Madri or Gretchen, if you guys could monitor those just for any questions. I don't know if there's any coming in. And if we don't see any, we can let everyone go. I think we're about 15 minutes early, so give you a little time between now and your next session. Yeah, Madri or Gretchen, do you see any that have come in? No? Okay, well, we'll let everyone go. Have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.